I mean, after all the efforts taken at peace building and amnesty with militants in the Niger Delta, how badly has the situation regressed, and what's the impact, do you think, going to be on investor sentiment around Nigeria at the moment?
Yeah, this is what is called an unwelcome development. A lot of work had gone into the amnesty program. A lot of work had gone into the constructive engagement with the militants, and a lot of work politically has gone in because we have a Niger Delta president. However, the problem now is that we are now beginning to see the three dimensions of the Niger Delta problem. One is the environmental issue. The second one is the ideology of self-determination and getting a greater resource control. And the third and most difficult part of it is the criminal enterprise of bunkering and kidnapping. These three issues have come to the forefront again at a time when Nigeria needs its least.
All right. Now, we know that the price of oil has recovered, which is good for Nigeria, which earns almost 90% of foreign exchange from oil. And we also know that because of the peace-building efforts, oil output had recovered to about 2 million barrels per day, especially in the last 3 months. How vulnerable is the economy at the moment to these sorts of attacks? Because it could affect the situation of production and output as well.
Yes, Nigeria is more vulnerable to output shocks than price vulnerability or price volatility. Now, any drop in production could have a very negative impact on the revenue and the capacity of Nigeria to meet its very ambitious infrastructure development program, for the states to actually fund their fiscal deficits, and for the federal government actually to deliver on its programs and strategy before the election.
All right, we're also dealing with a situation, Bismarck, where because of proposed reforms to the oil industry, many of the oil majors had started to take a backseat in terms of further investments in the region. How much more disinvestment could this lead to?
Well, there's a slowdown in investment, getting to the final investment decision, because oil majors are not sure as to what the outcome of the petroleum bill will be. They're also not sure as to what the outcome of the election is. But in times like this, they just defer the investment decision a little while. But that is, the rig count is up. I think the rig count is about 21. It's back up there. The local content program is moving quite aggressively. And, to be honest with you, production is back up to about 2.1 million barrels with the price. But what is more important is that with this kind of robust production and good prices, it is not actually manifesting itself in the revenue profile of the external reserve picture of Nigeria. So any cutback in production, or any drop in production for that matter, could have a negative impact on the reserves, which are already at extremely marginal, at a marginal level right now.
All right, we also have heard that the government, or Nigeria rather, is intending on asking OPEC to increase its quota, because so far we've seen growth move above 7.7%, and as we said earlier on, output has risen. So in terms of really just driving the economy forward, they need to do something about these output quotas. Would OPEC budge?
I don't think OPEC is going to budge, because if you increase prices, increase production at this time, immediately you begin to undermine the price. But don't forget, there's another thing. The dollar itself, in which oil is denominated, has actually lost a lot of value. So effectively, the price of oil has not actually gone up that dramatically against the basket of currencies. So in nominal terms, yes, $82 a barrel or $81 a barrel. But effectively, against the euro, against the yen, or against the British pound, it's not that that price increase is not that manifest.
Just talk to us very briefly, Bismarck, about what the proposed petroleum industry bill intends to do. We know it's about deregulating the sector, having more local players come through, privatizing the various subsidiaries of the national oil company. How much of a structural change will this create for Nigeria, and can the economy absorb some of these changes?
I think that the petroleum industry bill is a very, very ambitious bill. It's a comprehensive bill that tries to address all of the issues of the oil industry at the same time. The more practical and realistic approach would have been to break it up into bits and take them. It would have been easier to pass those things that time, but I think there was an ambitious program. Nigeria was in a hurry and trying to push all of it through. So there's the fiscal part of it, which talks about the tax regime. There's the local content, which talks about local participation. There's the compensation of the host communities, which has talk about extracting things for the local communities. And more than anything else, there's the restructuring of the NNPC, both on its regulatory side and also on its operating side. So it's quite an ambitious bill. It's quite utopian. But I think at the end of the day, when it goes through the committee stages and everything, and finally what is going to come out will be a much more practical, toned down, more realistic, which will have something a little bit for everybody and not everything for everybody.
And finally, Bismarck, I mean, going back to the whole question of security and its impact on general investment, it's not just security in the Niger Delta that's come to the fore. There have been reports of armed robberies and a spate of criminality across the other regions in Nigeria. There have been reports of sectarian and religious violence that sporadically breaks out in Nigeria. Stories about child abductions. I mean, it just seems as though there's a sense of real unease about living and working in Nigeria at the moment. Has the government got a grip on this?
I think the government has it in view, and I think some of these things are hyped beyond reason. I think that the truth is that, yes, there's Boko Haram incidents here, there are some men issues here, there's kidnapping, but these things, there's a positive correlation between these events and electoral, the elections and all of that. And usually it goes in a cycle. After the elections, things calm down a little bit. But definitely one of the key elements of the manifestos of all the candidates is that they have to come to grip with law and order and security. Also, secondly, is that the disparity between the rich and the poor in Nigeria is becoming wider as the income has grown. And therefore, these are manifestations of this increased Gini coefficient and income disparity. So it must be a strategic objective of the government today and the government that will follow, even if the current government stays in power, which could happen. Then they would have to now come to terms with dealing with security, not just from an investor perspective, but as a major strategic objective to ensuring that those who come in to invest, both domestic and international, have their investments protected.